What are those?
These are my Spider-Man pajamas.
Before TGIF was a big, branded event, before Urkel and the Tanner family took over Friday nights, there was a little odd couple sitcom about a Chicago guy and his sheep-obsessed cousin from a tiny Mediterranean island. Perfect Strangers ran from 1986 to 1993 and quietly became one of the most beloved comfort shows of the late 80s and early 90s. At the center of it all were Larry Appleton, the chronically anxious, always scheming Midwesterner, and Balki Bartokomous, a sweet, naive immigrant from the fictional island of Mypos. If you remember the Dance of Joy, Dimitri the Sheep, or Balki demolishing American catchphrases, you already know how weird and wonderful this show could be. But behind the simple premise and broad slapstick was a surprisingly strange production history. Unaired pilots, missing characters, retooled jobs, and storylines that went completely off the rails by the final season. So let's hop back to Chicago, dust off those TGIF memories, and dive into the bizarre world behind the cousins' tiny apartment and even tinier paychecks. Don't be ridiculous. Of course you should like and subscribe before we start the countdown. Here are 15 weird facts from Perfect Strangers. 15. The show built around a side character that almost didn't happen. The entire show exists because of a side character from a completely different project. Bronson Pinchot stole scenes as the flamboyant art gallery worker Serge in Beverly Hills Cop, and ABC basically said, "We need a whole show of that." They approached him with a sitcom about a foreign fish out of water, originally called The Greenhorn. Pinchot actually turned it down at first, exhausted from other commitments and worried about getting locked into a stereotype. Then, on a trip to Greece, he observed villagers and their mannerisms, the warmth, the odd sayings, the slightly off timing of their English, and realized he could build a character that felt more human than caricature. That character became Balki Bartokomous. Even the name has a goofy origin story. Balki was inspired by his sister's dog, Balcony. From that seed, Perfect Strangers grew into a full series built entirely around the chemistry of a nervous Chicago everyman and his relentlessly optimistic cousin from a country that didn't exist. Without Serge, without that random trip to Greece, there is no Balki, no Mypos, and no Dance of Joy. 14. The unaired Louie Anderson pilot. Before Mark Lynn Baker ever played Larry, Perfect Strangers had a completely different cousin in the lead, stand-up comedian Louie Anderson. In the original unaired pilot, Anderson played Cousin Louie, the American relative who takes in Balki. On paper, it sounded like a sure thing. Two strong comedians in a simple, high-concept setup. But when ABC watched the pilot, something just didn't click. The dynamic leaned heavier and grouchier than they wanted, and the physical comedy didn't quite land. The network loved Balki, but they needed someone who could match Bronson Pinchot's energy and play off his wild swings from innocence to chaos. Enter Mark Lynn Baker, who brought a theatrical, almost vaudeville sensibility to the role. Suddenly, you had a modern Laurel and Hardy, Larry as the tightly wound straight man, Balki as the chaotic optimist, both tumbling through elaborate physical gags and emotional meltdowns. The Louie Anderson pilot has never officially aired, and most fans have only seen brief clips. But that abandoned version is a reminder of how fragile TV history is. One recast changed everything, and gave us one of the great sitcom duos of the era. 13. Mypos, the fake country built from real villages. Mypos, the homeland Balki never stops talking about, is one of TV's strangest fictional countries. Officially, it's a tiny Mediterranean island, somewhere near Greece, but its culture is a bizarre mashup of Greek, Balkan, and completely invented traditions. What made Mypos feel so oddly believable is that much of it came straight out of Bronson Pinchot's imagination. He'd pull mannerisms, superstitions, and quirky sayings from real people he'd met and then dial them up to 11. Myposian customs like bizarre festivals, strange animals, and complicated family rituals often started as improvised jokes that writers later turned into canon. The result is a place that somehow feels both specific and impossible. You get herds of sheep, old world grandmothers, and folk wisdom right next to nonsense phrases, and folk heroes that only exist inside Balki's head. Mypos was never meant to be a realistic country. It was a comedy playground. But by giving Balki such a vivid, if ridiculous backstory, the show quietly explored the immigrant experience. This idea of carrying a whole world inside you that nobody around you fully understands, even as they learn to love it. 12. The Dance of Joy and Dimitri the Sheep. If you watched even a few episodes, chances are you remember the Dance of Joy. Every time something amazing happened, good news, a promotion, a personal victory, Larry and Balki would grab each other and break into this wild, hopping celebration. It looked like a cross between a folk dance, a football touchdown, and two kids who just discovered sugar. The Dance of Joy became the show's secret handshake. Viewers knew that when the cousins launched into it, we were getting a pure, unfiltered burst of happiness. It was goofy, repetitive, and absolutely infectious. Then there's Dimitri the Sheep, Balki's beloved stuffed animal, and the closest thing Mypos had to a national mascot. At first, Dimitri is just a background prop in Balki's room. Over time, he becomes a recurring visual gag, a character in his own right, and eventually, the star of Larry and Balki's comic strip, Dimitri's World. Between the Dance of Joy and Dimitri, the show built a private language of callbacks and inside jokes. Those quirks made the cousins' world feel rich and lived in, like you were being welcomed into a family that had its own rituals long before you arrived. 11. From Tuesday filler to TGIF blueprint, Perfect Strangers didn't start as a cornerstone of family television. When it first premiered, it was just another mid-season sitcom slotted into random weeknights. But audiences quickly connected with Larry and Balki's chemistry, and the ratings gave ABC a new idea. As the late 80s rolled on, the network began experimenting with a family-friendly Friday night block. Perfect Strangers was moved to Fridays and paired with other shows, gradually forming what would become the legendary TGIF lineup. Before long, the cousins were serving as the unofficial welcoming committee for the whole block. It's easy to remember TGIF for Full House, Family Matters, Step by Step, and Boy Meets World, but Perfect Strangers was the prototype. Its mix of broad physical comedy, heartfelt lessons, and just a touch of absurdity set the tone for what Family Sitcom Friday would look like. The show proved you could lean into wholesome, character-based comedy without feeling square. In many ways, Larry and Balki walked, sometimes tripped, so that the rest of TGIF could run. 10. Harriette's elevator ride to Family Matters. One of the wildest things about Perfect Strangers is that one of TV's most famous 90s families started in its lobby. Jo Marie Payton's character, Harriette Winslow, was introduced as the tough, no-nonsense elevator operator at the Chicago Chronicle, where Larry and Balki worked. Harriette was only supposed to be a supporting character, but she immediately popped. Her sarcastic wit and eye-rolling tolerance for Larry's panic and Balki's confusion gave the office scenes a grounded, working-class edge. Audiences loved her enough that ABC did something unusual. They spun her off into her own series. That spin-off became Family Matters, which introduced the Winslow family and eventually unleashed Steve Urkel on the world. So the entire Urkel phenomenon, and one of the defining sitcoms of the 1990s, has its roots in this earlier show about a sheep-loving immigrant and his neurotic cousin. Harriette's journey from elevator operator to sitcom matriarch is a reminder that sometimes the most enduring TV icons start out a few floors below the main action, pushing buttons and stealing scenes. 9. The theme song with a double life. Even if you haven't watched an episode in years, you can probably still hum the Perfect Strangers theme song. Nothing's Gonna Stop Me Now, written by Jesse Frederick and Bennett Salve and sung by David Pomeranz, is pure 80s optimism. Big melody, soaring vocals, and lyrics about taking chances in a brand new life. It perfectly captures the show's tone. Two guys in over their heads, chasing the American dream with more enthusiasm than common sense. The opening credits, Larry leaving Wisconsin, Balki leaving Mypos, both heading to Chicago, turned the song into a mini-movie about reinvention. For a while, the theme lived mostly in nostalgia. Then, decades later, it popped up again in a surprising place. The series Only Murders in the Building, where it's used as a deep-cut reference that delighted old-school sitcom fans. That little revival reminded people just how good TV themes used to be. In an era where many shows barely have opening credits, Nothing's Gonna Stop Me Now survives as a time capsule. A reminder of when a theme song wasn't just background noise, but a promise that you were about to spend 22 comforting minutes with familiar faces. 8. Constantly changing jobs and apartments. If you only remember the cousins at the Chicago Chronicle, you might be surprised how many times the show reinvented where Larry and Balki worked and lived. They start at the Ritz discount store, a downscale shop where Balki first has to learn the basics of American retail, and Larry tries and fails to be a big shot. Then they move into the newsroom world of the Chicago Chronicle. Suddenly, Larry is a reporter, Balki is filing paperwork, and the show shifts into workplace comedy with bosses, deadlines, and Harriette running the elevator. It feels like a completely different series, even though the core relationship stays the same. Later, in the later seasons, Larry and Balki become partners on a comic strip featuring Dimitri the Sheep. We go from retail to journalism to creative freelancing, all without much explanation about how these guys are qualified for any of it. The same thing happens with their living situation. Their apartment mysteriously changes, different layout, different exterior, without anyone acknowledging it. It's as if the universe quietly upgrades their lives behind the scenes, and the cousins just roll with it like it's the most normal thing in the world. 7. The child character who disappeared overnight. Classic sitcom rule. When a show goes on long enough, someone suggests adding a cute kid. In season 6, Perfect Strangers followed that trend with Tess, a little girl who lives upstairs from Larry and Balki. The idea was clear. Give the cousins a child to bounce off of, add some awe factor, and maybe pull in younger viewers. Tess wasn't just a random guest star. She showed up in promos, appeared in the opening credits, and seemed poised to become a real part of the show's world. And then, she vanished. No dramatic goodbye, no explanation, no moving away. One week she's there, the next week the show just quietly forgets she ever existed. Fans still debate what happened behind the scenes, but on screen it's one of the more blatant examples of a sitcom test balloon getting popped in real time. ABC was famously trying to make its TGIF lineup more kid-friendly, and Tess seems like a product of that strategy. The disappearance of Tess is a weird little artifact from a time when TV shows could hit the reset button without social media immediately demanding answers. 6. From Girlfriends of the Week to the emotional core. When Jennifer and Marianne show up as flight attendant neighbors, they seem like pretty standard sitcom love interests. Jennifer is level-headed and cautious. Marianne is bubbly and a bit spacey, and both are clearly there to put Larry and Balki's romantic lives into play. What's surprising is how fully they evolve into core characters. Over the seasons, Jennifer and Larry's relationship grows from awkward dates to serious commitment. Balki and Marianne follow a similar path, with their childlike sweetness becoming one of the show's most endearing elements. By the later seasons, the show is less about two single guys scraping by in the city, and more about two couples trying to build a life together. The four of them tackle engagements, marriages, and eventually pregnancies, with Mypos customs crashing headfirst into American expectations. Instead of cycling through endless new love interests, Perfect Strangers leaned into long-term relationships, and that choice gave the series unexpected emotional weight. What started as a buddy sitcom turned into a four-person ensemble, with the women grounding and complicating the cousins' dreams in equal measure. 5. The the baby quiz, and the hot air balloon birth. By season 8, the show's plots went from quirky to downright surreal, and nowhere is that clearer than in the whole baby quiz storyline. Larry and Jennifer, expecting their first child, end up competing on a game show called The Baby Quiz, where parents-to-be answer parenting trivia for prizes. It starts as a parody of cheesy TV competitions, but quickly spirals. Larry, desperate to win and prove he's prepared, cheats his way through questions, only to get slammed by guilt and consequences. The whole arc plays like a fever dream about how overwhelming new parenthood can feel. Then comes the grand finale. Up, up, and away. Through a chain of sitcom events only marginally connected to reality, Jennifer goes into labor while stuck in a hot air balloon. At the same time, Mary Ann goes into labor too. We get a double birth climax involving sky-high chaos, emergency landings, and as many jokes as the writers can cram into contractions. It's ridiculous, over the top, and absolutely memorable, a sign that by the end of its run, Perfect Strangers was happy to embrace cartoon logic if it meant sending the characters out with a bang. 4. Robespierre Boinky, Bartokomous, and Myposian Baby Logic. As if the hot air balloon birth weren't strange enough, the show doubles down on weirdness with the name of Balki and Mary Ann's baby, Robespierre Boinky Bartokomous. Yes, Balki names his child, in part after Maximilien Robespierre, the French revolutionary tied to the Reign of Terror. Why? Because in classic Myposian fashion, Balki misunderstands history and focuses on Robespierre as a powerful figure rather than a complicated, often terrifying one. Paired with the delightfully goofy Boinky, the name becomes a perfect symbol of how Mypos reshapes everything it touches. Throughout the series, Myposian traditions around birth, childhood, and family are played for laughs. There are elaborate rituals, bizarre superstitions, and rules that seem designed to confuse any outsider. Giving a baby a name that swings wildly from European Revolution to cartoon sound effect fits right in. Robespierre Boinky is more than a punchline, though. He represents the next generation of this blended family. A kid whose identity is part Mypos, part America, and entirely wrapped up in Balki's upside-down understanding of the world. Only Perfect Strangers could turn a baby name into a full-on cultural collision. 3. A finale clip show, using footage fans never saw. Sitcom finales love clip shows. It's an easy way to say goodbye. Roll the highlights, play some emotional music, and remind everyone how far the characters have come. Perfect Strangers follows that tradition, but with a twist that's especially weird for dedicated fans. In the final episode, the show includes a sentimental montage of past moments, set to a nostalgic song. Only not all of those moments actually aired. Some of the clips are from deleted scenes or unused footage, meaning the memories we're seeing are things the audience never got to experience during the regular run. It creates a strange, almost dreamlike feeling. You're supposed to be reminiscing about scenes you shared with these characters, but instead, you're glimpsing an alternate version of their past. It's a farewell full of ghosts, not just of canceled episodes, but of directions the show might have taken. On top of that, the final season was shortened and shuffled around, making the timeline feel even more fragmented. The result is a finale that's emotional, but also oddly disjointed. Like saying goodbye to friends you didn't realize had whole chapters you missed. 2. Perfect Strangers in Other Universes. For a show that ended in 1993, Perfect Strangers has had a surprisingly weird afterlife in other series. One of the strangest examples comes from the HBO series The Leftovers. In that world, 2% of the global population suddenly vanishes in an event called The Departure, and it's casually revealed that the entire cast of Perfect Strangers disappeared together. Even better, Mark Lynn Baker appears as a fictionalized version of himself, leaning into that bizarre premise. The idea that Larry, Balki, and the gang all vanished in a cosmic event turns this lighthearted sitcom into a dark, metaphysical in-joke. Elsewhere, shows like The Goldbergs have recreated the opening credits as a nostalgia tribute, and YouTube creators have parodied the Dance of Joy, Balki's accent, and the theme song. Every so often, the cousins pop back into culture like a shared memory everyone forgot they had. These references prove how deeply Perfect Strangers imprinted on viewers. Even when modern shows are dealing with mystery, horror, or meta-comedy, there's something irresistible about pulling Larry and Balki's world into their own. 1. The hit sitcom that quietly faded away. Here's the weirdest fact of all. For a show that ran 8 seasons, produced 150 episodes, and helped launch both TGIF and Family Matters, Perfect Strangers doesn't get talked about nearly as much as its younger sitcom cousins. Part of that comes down to syndication and streaming. For years, it was hard to find reruns, and full seasons weren't always easily available. While Full House and Family Matters lived on in endless repeats and streaming deals, Larry and Balki's Adventures became more of a fuzzy memory, a show people remembered fondly, but couldn't easily revisit. That scarcity turned Perfect Strangers into a kind of cult comfort show. Fans who grew up with it remember the Dance of Joy, the Chicago Chronicle, Mypos, and Harriette's Elevator. But newer viewers often only know it through references, memes, or that wild leftover storyline. In a way, it fits. A series about an immigrant from a fictional island and his anxious cousin was always going to be a little out of step, even in nostalgia. Perfect Strangers helped define an era of TV, and then, like a lot of great sitcoms, quietly stepped out of the spotlight. Conclusion: why Larry and Balki still matter. Looking back, Perfect Strangers is more than a quirky sitcom about a mismatched pair of cousins. It's a snapshot of an era when TV was willing to get weird, heartfelt, and unapologetically earnest, all at the same time. The show mixed immigrant jokes with genuine empathy, slapstick with sincere emotion, and small-scale stories with truly bonkers. Plots about hot air balloons, game shows, and fictional islands. Larry and Balki gave us a version of the American dream that was messy and hopeful. Larry believed success was something you could force, through sheer anxiety and planning. Balki believed life worked out if you stayed kind, kept your heart open, and trusted your weird little traditions. Somewhere in between their two worldviews is where the show's real magic lived. It sparked a major spin-off, shaped the TGIF lineup, and left behind some of the most memorable rituals in TV history, from the Dance of Joy to Dimitri the Sheep. If you grew up with Perfect Strangers, let us know your favorite Balki sayings, episodes, or TGIF memories in the comments. And if you're discovering it for the first time, well, as Balki would say, don't be ridiculous. Hit that like and subscribe, and dive into the cousins' world.